everyone, I'm Brea and I need your help with some book recommendations. So this year I'm really trying to hone in on what I like in books in hopes that I will do a better job of picking things up that I actually like. So in this video I'm going to be talking about things that I love in books, and hopefully that'll give you a good starting point on what to recommend me. And as I'm talking through the things that I love, I'll also give you guys some examples of books that I've loved that have these things in them. And I've given all of these books 4 or 5 stars, so don't you worry if you don't have any recommendations for me. If you like any of the things that I like in books, then maybe you can get some recommendations from this video or down below in the comments. And the 3 categories I'll be talking about are characters, tropes, and settings. And I'm doing this video in collaboration with a few other small booktubers, and so I'll leave all of their channel descriptions down below, so make sure you go check out their videos because they're all going to be talking about settings that they love in books. And shout out to Beccie from BecX Reads for hosting this collaboration. And with that, we'll get started with settings that I love in books. So first up is school/training settings. And listen, I'm at the age now where I know that I'm not going back to school, but I like to consider myself as a lifelong learner. So school and training settings just always hit for me. And this is a setting that works across multiple genres for me. So some of the examples I'm going to give are going to be across fantasy, mystery thriller, and sci-fi. So an example for fantasy would be Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and this is a dark academia set at Yale that follows a girl that can raise the dead, and she does so for this secret society. And then we also have Legendborn, which is also kind of a dark academia that follows this girl and a secret society that hunts demons, and this young girl is also trying to figure out her own unique set of powers. And another example that I have for fantasy would be Amari and the Night Brothers, and this book follows a young girl whose brother goes missing, and to help find him she has to enroll in this like magical school where she does some training and there's a competition involved. And 2 examples of this showing up in mystery thriller for me. One is If We Are Villains by M.L. Rio, and this just follows a group of acting students at a college, and one of them dies, one of them is the murderer, and you spend the story figuring out who did what. And then the other example is Confessions by Kane Manatu, and so this doesn't take place completely at a school, but it does start out at a school where a teacher realizes that 2 of her students are responsible for the tragic death of her daughter. And then the example that I have for sci-fi is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. And so this is a dystopian novel set in space where a young man has to pretend to become a part of this elite group of people in this caste system that he's in, and part of becoming part of this elite involves going to this school where they compete in this deadly competition. And Red Rising is also a good segue into the next setting that I absolutely love, and it's something that pops up in sci-fi all the time, and that is space. And I feel like sci-fi is like my bread and butter. It's a genre that I always tend to gravitate towards, and so space is something that just pops up a lot in these books. So one example is Dawn by Octavia Butler, and so Dawn follows this woman named Lilith, and Lilith gets plucked off of Earth by these aliens, and these aliens are trying to save the human race, but we're following Lilith as she is trying to balance her relationship with the aliens as well as not betraying the human race. And then we also have The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which follows a man who is literally exploring the galaxy. He is meeting different creatures and people as he's trying to write this guide to the galaxy. It's a very funny book, but it's primarily set in space. And then of course, if we're talking about space, I have to mention Andy Weir. Okay, so we have The Martian, and The Martian is just about an astronaut who gets left on Mars and he has to figure out how to survive on the planet on his own. And then we also have Project Hail Mary, and this is also about an astronaut who wakes up on his space mission to realize that the rest of his crew is dead, and he also realizes that he doesn't remember his name and why he's on this mission. And there is a very unlikely friendship that happens in this book that I really love. And one setting that I've realized recently that I really enjoy is courtroom settings. And so crime drama television shows are something that I always love to watch, especially the courtroom scenes, and it's something that translates over to books for me. And I'm one of those sick people that really wants to be a part of a jury, which inevitably means that I will never be a part of a jury. But I have 3 examples of courtroom settings for you guys. So first up is The Holdout by Graham Moore, and so this follows a group of jurors who are deadlocked on a murder case. However, one juror ends up turning the tide and gets everybody to agree to an acquittal. However, 10 years later, one of the jurors ends up dead, and the juror that ended up turning the tide 10 years ago is the prime suspect. And then we have Miracle Creek by Angie Kim, and this is about a single mother who is accused of killing her son when a medical treatment goes wrong, and we're getting different POVs as we figure out what happened as the witnesses are taking the stand. So a lot of this does take place in the courtroom, which I really enjoyed. And then the last example I have of courtroom settings is going to be The Night Swim. And so this follows a true crime podcaster who is kind of roped into covering a sexual assault trial in this small town. And she finds out that her past and this trial actually kind of collide a little bit. But as she's following the case, she's in the courtroom as some of the witnesses are giving testimony and things like that. So it doesn't take place completely in the courtroom, but a good part of it does. And if you haven't read this book, I definitely recommend it on audio. So that wraps up settings. And now we're going to talk about just regular themes and tropes that I love in books. And the first one is going to be soul survivor stories, or just survival stories in general. I don't know what about just someone figuring out how to live just makes me really enjoy a book. And I would say that one of my favorite books of all time, and it's a book series that really just got me into reading in general, is The Hunger Games. And The Hunger Games, I feel like, is one of the OG original survival stories. And so this is going to be my first example of soul survival or survival stories that I really like. But a side note, have you guys seen on TikTok that there's been a revival of The Hunger Games because the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes movie is coming out later this year? And there's just one girl on TikTok who's doing a whole deep dive on The Hunger Games and all the characters. So if you're a Hunger Games book lover, movie lover, definitely go check out her TikTok. I'll put her here. And I said that The Hunger Games was the OG survival story. Lord of the Flies is probably actually one of the OG survival stories. And so this is another example of one that I love. And then another example would be Final Girls by Riley Sager. And this follows a group of women who all ended up being the sole survivor of these really mass murders. However, some years pass, and one by one, these final girls are getting killed off. And so we're following the last final girl as she's trying to figure out what's happening. And then 2 books that you guys have already seen on this list, and that is Project Hail Mary and The Martian by Andy Weir. Both of these are soul survival stories, and the fact that these are popping up in multiple places just tells you how much I really loved these books, and they just have so much in them that I enjoy. And so the next general trope or theme that I enjoy in books is just the bending of time that can also go into like alternate realities. And so I like books that play with time just because I low-key feel like time is fake. Like, we really made it all up. And I feel like a prime example of that is daylight savings time. This last daylight savings time that we just had apparently is supposed to be our last one, which just tells me it's all made up. It's all fake. But y'all didn't come here for conspiracy theories, so I'm going to give you guys some examples of books that play with time. One of them is my favorite book of all time, and that is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. And this follows a young Black woman who keeps getting pulled back into time, into the antebellum South, where she keeps saving this white son of a plantation owner. And every time she gets pulled back into essentially being a slave, but she also ends up staying for longer each time that she gets pulled back. Another one that plays with time and alternate realities is going to be Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Anytime that someone wants a recommendation from me in the thriller or sci-fi genre, I always recommend Dark Matter. And this is just about a man who wakes up one day and his life just isn't his life anymore. So his son doesn't exist, his wife isn't his wife, and he's just trying to figure out what's real or not. But this book gets crazy. That was a short synopsis. but this book gets crazy, okay? And then we have The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. And this is kind of like a Groundhog's Day type of book, but it's also a mystery. So this just says Evelyn Hardcastle will die every day until Aiden Bishop can identify her killer and break the cycle. But every time the day begins again, Aiden wakes up in a body of a different guest. And some of his hosts are more helpful than others. And so I've not really read too many like Groundhog Day-ish books where people relive the same day over and over. This really is like the only one, but I did really enjoy it. And then one bonus category for tropes and themes is going to be memory. I love books that play with memory manipulation or people have forgotten their memories. And so the examples that I'm going to show are ones that have already showed up on this list. So we have Legendborn, and the main character in this book, after the tragic death of her mother, ends up forgetting a lot of her past. And we have Project Hail Mary. Like I said, he wakes up on that ship and can't remember his name, and he also can't remember why he's there. And then we have Final Girls by Riley Sager. And so our main character, the night that she survived her mass murder, she actually can't remember any of the details that happened that night. And then there's also Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Again, our main character survives a mass murder, and she also can't remember the details of what happened that night. So as you can see, there's definitely a theme when it comes to memory in some of these books that I already like. And the last category is going to be characters. And I definitely say that I'm more of a plot-driven reader. However, characters definitely can make or break a book for me. And so one of the things that I love in characters is when they're morally gray or I'm not supposed to like them. I think there's a very special art in writing a character that is probably inherently evil, or you're just not supposed to like them, but the reader enjoys them anyway, or the reader is rooting for them anyway. There's just a special talent in that. And so one example of that I think a lot of people are going to be familiar with is You by Caroline Kepnes. And so obviously we follow Joe, who's a serial killer, and he kills in the name of love and kills to try to protect his love interest. But at the end of the day, he's a serial killer. And yet, because of the way this book is written, you low-key, I don't want to say root for him, but you like kind of understand where he's coming from, / you don't hate him as much as you should. Another example of this for me is going to be The Push by Ashley Aldrain. And so this is about a mother with a troubled upbringing who thinks that her daughter is actually kind of psychotic, but she's not sure if it's just because she's a bad mom or because there is something actually wrong with her child. I feel like this book just took me on a ride, and I really didn't know who to believe and what I should be thinking about some of these characters, but I definitely ended up enjoying this book. And so the last example I have for morally gray characters is going to be Vicious by V.E. Schwab. And so we follow two college-age students who realize that if you have a near-death experience, it actually gives you superpowers. But when one of their experiments goes wrong, they end up becoming foes instead of friends. And from there, they kind of just have differing opinions of how to handle this knowledge that they have. And last up for characters, we have non-human characters. And what I like about non-human characters is that I feel like it adds a sense of mystery to the story and a sense of surprise, because a lot of these characters are going to be really fictional or just made up in general. And so it really gives writers the opportunity to kind of just go crazy and they can do whatever they want because these characters are made up. And so there's no real limitations to what they can do. So one example of this is The Deep by River Solomon. And so while this is loosely based on human beings, the characters are actually closer to mermaids. And so we follow this species of sea people who are descendants of African slaves that were thrown overboard during the slave trade. And one character in particular is tasked to keep all the memories of the species because it was such a dark past. They don't want everybody to have to carry those dark memories around. And I really enjoyed this, even though it's rooted in like human beings and human history, there's still an element of them not being human. And then we have The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. And in this book, the world is ending and we're following 3 different POVs as the world starts to collapse and people are starting to fight for resources. And I'm just gonna say it right now, that is probably like the bare bones description that I can give you. This book is written so well, but the non-human main character in this book to me was the earth itself. The way that it was written and the way that it was just humanized almost as a character was just really special. And so definitely pick that one up if you haven't and you like non-human main characters. And then two examples that I've already mentioned for other categories. We have The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. A lot of the characters that our main character comes across definitely are not human. And then we have Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and I'm not going to give too much away, but like I said, there was a very special friendship that happened in this book, and it's probably one of the reasons this book is one of my favorites of all time. Okay, and so hopefully that gives you guys a good idea of the things that I like in books. So please leave some book recommendations for me down below in the comments. You may or may not see these recommendations pop back up in another video. If you can see where this is going, then we're here. But if you made it to the end of this video, please leave a heart emoji. One, because we all love books here at this channel, and because I love you for making it to the end. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.